we're getting to an interesting point here that's relevant finally to flak and bombing. The way this flak works is that this is light flak. So light flak can project either a barrage or direct fire. A barrage is basically they're aiming at an area and they are just filling that with exploding shells. So you would target a square or a group of squares, depending on whether it's a light or a heavy barrage. So when the light flak projects barrage, it can only put them in two spots, which are here and here. This means that all of these squares, so these four squares and these four squares, would be considered a barrage zone. So any squadrons flying into these squares is going to be potentially affected by barrage. They resolve the barrage attacks at the end of the movement phase, before the combat phase begins. This is the extent of the light flak's barrage. If this was heavy flak, then this would extend all the way up to the top of the board, because heavy barrage has a ridiculous range. But light flak can only affect the bottom two altitude bands here, within the adjacent squares. At this point, assuming the bombers stay at this height, and this is actually one reason why I wanted them to stay at altitude 2, is because they are going to be above this barrage zone, so they will not be affected by barrage. But there's another mode of fire that the flak can have, and that's direct fire. And direct fire for light flak can reach up to altitude level 4 in the adjacent columns. So it's either the same column or the column next to it, but only up to altitude 4. So it's this box. Direct fire is when the flak is just firing shells directly at the squadron. They're not just aiming at an area and hoping that the squadron is going to fly into one of the exploding shells. They're actually aiming at the planes and trying to shoot them with their shells. So that's a little bit more effective, and it's more like an actual direct fire, hence the name. In this case, the barrage will not be happening. But right now, in this turn, the flak will not be able to affect the bombers. But in the next turn, when the Blenheims enter this zone, they will be able to shoot at the bombers. And next turn as well, the Blenheim, if it makes it into this square, it will be able to drop its bombs, and then we'll see what happens there. Okay, turn 7. At this point, the lead Blenheim is going to declare that they are going to be aiming. They're setting up their bombing run, essentially. They have to fly for 2 squares without changing height or facing. They designate the target when the squadron is within 2 or fewer columns of it. They are declaring that the supply is their target at this point. So they must fly over the target at any altitude without changing height or facing. Once above the target, the squadron drops its bombs. So this is a straight level bombing attack. Nothing more complicated than that. In other scenarios with other planes, you could do dive bombing, steep angle bombing, glide bombing, torpedo attacks, etc. But for this scenario, it's just a straight normal level bombing. So we've declared that the supply is the target. Both our bombers have their bomb load still, although they've lost a few planes. Not enough to make a difference though, because there are 12 planes in each Blenheim squadron, so we don't have to worry about them getting completely destroyed. Now, what happens next? The flak is certainly going to try to do some direct fire. Now, interestingly, if the G50 is in the same square as the Blenheim when it gets attacked by the direct fire from the flak, the G50 will also possibly get hit. Unlike barrage, the direct fire actually happens in the combat phase, but it actually happens at the beginning. It would happen before the air combat actually happens. So really, they'd have to hope that they don't get hit by the flak. Well, then the Blenheims would drop the bombs, and then they'd attack the Blenheim. So really, there's not much reason for the G50 to actually stay with the Blenheim here. So the G50 is going to drop its tally on the S Blenheim and just circle here. Even though these bombers are going to fly through their square, they just didn't spot them or didn't feel like fighting them. To be fair, they are at a -2 for depleted ammo, and they're also disrupted, so they don't really have an awful lot of nerve to fight right now. What's going to happen now is that there's no dogfight anymore. That isn't going to move. No escorts anymore. The bomber is going to move, and the way the flak attacks is it's not like the bomber moves into this square and suddenly gets attacked because it's in the zone. It's just where the bomber ends up, that's where it's going to be attacked. So the bomber moves into the square above its target, which now means that the flak can attack it directly, because remember, the barrage won't reach that altitude. So the direct fire is resolved in the combat phase before bombing or air combat is resolved. So you'll see on the flak counter here, there's a whole bunch of numbers. So the 4 is the number of hits that target can take. So the flak can take 4 damage, the supply can take 3. The red number up here is the defense modifier. They have a 0. But the L01 means that it's a light flak. The 0 is the strength of the flak. And the 1 means it has 1 fire channel, which means it can fire at 1 target. Usually heavier flak has a 2 there. So that means that they could actually fire at 2 different targets. But in this case, they only have 1 channel for the flak. So they're going to just fire at 1 squadron. And the 2 VP is how many victory points the attackers will gain if they destroy that. That's a little more convoluted. I'll get to that when we actually get to the bombing. The S, by the way, on the supply means they have small arms fire, which makes a barrage zone in its own square. So if somebody was attacking them from G0, then they could be subject to a barrage from the light flak and from the small arms coming from the supply, which would be interesting. The barrage zones in that case would overlap, but you choose one or the other to actually affect the attackers there. That's moot in this case because we're not worrying about barrage. So once above the target, the bomber drops its bombs. So it is above the target, so it's going to drop its bombs. Boom. And they are aiming at the supply, obviously. It's a nice juicy 10 victory points. Now, the bombs have dropped. They're not resolved at this moment, though, because we have to resolve the direct fire first. So let's see what happens when the flak opens up with its direct fire. So as you can see, I've just put the flak attack table in the top right corner there. We are looking at the direct fire column. We roll 2 dice and we modify it accordingly based on the modifiers on the right there. So the firepower shown is only applied to the losses roll, should there be any. So we have the flak unit strength is 0, because that's what's shown on here. There is no supporting unit. Target isn't slowed. Basic speed is 3, so none of those modifiers apply. Target's altitude is 6 or less, so that's a +1. Target did perform bomb aiming this turn because it had set up its bombing run earlier on, and it's just moving 2 forward in a straight line, no change of altitude or facing. So that's bomb aiming. So it's got a +2 on the roll. So we roll on the direct fire column. As you can see on that, a 9 to 11 would inflict 1 hit, 12 to 13 would inflict 2 hits, 14 or more is not that it just dies, it means roll a die. The last column there, where it says place a bombing modifier marker only if the squadron dropped bombs during movement. In this case, the bomber ended its movement over the supply square. So it didn't drop the bombs during the movement, it dropped its bombs at the end of its movement. If it had started here and moved forward too, it would have moved here, dropped its bombs, and then finished its movement. That would be in the middle of the movement. So we don't have to worry about that bombing column here because that doesn't apply because it ended its movement there. But that penalty shown there is going to be a penalty applied to the bombing table, which is what happens when the bombs land, which we're going to be doing after this. So I believe then we have a +2 on the flak attack roll. So let's just roll that and see what happens. We rolled a 6. 6 plus 2 is 8. That is not enough for the direct fire to do anything. That C result there on the barrage actually means that any of the target squadrons would have to just make a cohesion roll right there and then. And then if we had actually rolled a hit, we would have also made a cohesion check as well at that point. So as it is, the direct flak did not actually cause the bombers to deviate or anything. They don't have to make a cohesion roll. They didn't take any hits or any possible losses, so they're okay in this case. Now that that's resolved, we move on to resolving the bombing attack. So the bombs have dropped. For this, we look to the bombing table, which I'm going to put in the top right corner here. Now, you'll see that there's a lot of modifiers to keep track of, but only some of these are going to apply here. It's a 2d6 roll. From the bombing table, you will see that the higher you roll, the greater percentage of the bomb value you will inflict as hits. Let's have a look at the bomb values here. That is a bomb value of 9 on the Blenheims. The higher the value, the better. If we make a modified roll of 12 or more, we will inflict 100% of that 9 bomb value. We will inflict 9 hits on the target. And the target, the supply dump, has a hits value of 3. The way that the bombing works here is that if you inflict the number of hits in total by the end of the scenario that is at least as much as that rating, you will get the victory points shown on the counter. If you inflict double, you will get double the victory points. If you inflict triple, you will get triple the victory points. So there's a pretty good reason to want to roll high. At this point, if we roll a 12 or more, we would inflict 9 damage on the target. That would be triple its value. We would get 30 victory points from that. But, as you can see, it's considerably more likely that we will get less. 10 to 11 is 50%, 8 to 9 is 25%, 6 to 7 is 10%. If we roll 5 or less, we don't get any hits. So we only have this one opportunity per bomber squadron. One bomb load that gets dropped. You can't split it up or anything. If this bomber doesn't do any damage to the supply, it's all down to this rear bomber here, which may or may not be attacked, depending on whether this G50 wakes up. Sorry, they should be circling. So you round to the nearest whole number as well when you're taking those percentages. So 10% of 9 would be 0.9. That's rounded to a 1. So it would be 1 hit. So let's see what we've got then. This is where the bomb sites come in. So if we look at this again, we've got a bomb site of V. The V bomb site column and the altitude modifier. If we're at altitude 1 to 2, we get a 0. So we don't have any penalties for altitude. Do we have a defense modifier? We do not, because this is not a ship. It's not a kamikaze attack. It's not dive bombings, deep angle bombing, glide bombing, power frag, or a torpedo attack, or an anvil attack. These are all other advanced ways of bombing things that certain planes can do. The bomber was attacked by flak this game turn. It was attacked, it didn't do any damage or anything, but if the bomber was not attacked by flak, then it would get a +1 bonus. At the same time, there's no negative bombing modifier inflicted by the flak attack. So it's still on no modifier at this point. Target is not an armoured ship, it's not a long-range torpedo. It was aimed. Bomber squadron is not a veteran or green or a jet or disrupted or a flight or broken. There's no weather modifiers. So you see, you go down that whole list and it turns out that in this case, none of the modifiers actually apply to us. It's a straight roll. So let's see what we roll and hope it's a high number. It's a 7. We have inflicted 1 hit, so 10% of 9 on the supply. We will grab a hit marker here, and this will keep track of the hits on the supply. At the moment, that means that if the other squadron doesn't hit the supply, then we have inflicted slight damage on the supply, which would give us 1 VP. So we really would like the T Squadron to be able to drop its bombs on there with a bit more effect. Now, any air combat would ensue, but there isn't any air combat. That's it for this round. So the bombs have blown up. Essentially, that's how flak and bombing work. The other thing is, if there were more bombers here, then we could have some of them dropping the bombs on the flak and trying to take that out. Because if you damage the flak enough, it becomes suppressed and it's not going to be able to fire at anyone anymore. One might argue that perhaps I could have dropped the bombs with the front squadron on the flak and then hoped that the T squadron in the rear would come up and drop its bombs on the supply and do enough damage. But I figured that I'd rather take the risk of getting hit by the flak and have 2 shots at trying to damage the supply here. It could have gone either way, but as you've seen, it's pretty random. So, and it's actually quite likely that you're not going to get a full load of hits. So, that's it for this turn. These guys fly off in the admin phase, and we will see what happens in turn 8. So, I've just realised something interesting. In my enthusiasm for wanting to do the flak and the bombing, I moved the Millennium S Squadron forward 2 squares in the last turn, and I forgot to move the T Squadron when it should have moved. So the T Squadron should actually be here at the start of turn 8 and not 2 squares behind. It doesn't change the results of this or anything, so this is all resolved as it happened. But for Squadron A, they can attempt to tally the T Squadron here and they'd succeed, probably, because they're in the same square. But the interesting thing now is that the bombers are still going to move first. So the S Squadron is going to move out of this square into E2 here. But the T Squadron is going to move into that square and drop its bombs. These guys are on their last legs anyway. A is -2 on its ammo. It's disrupted already. Chances are it's not going to survive its next cohesion roll. So do they still want to attack these bombers or not? Because, as we established already, the air combat happens after the flak and the bombing. So A attacking T afterwards isn't going to actually affect the bombing results. So what they could do is climb and fly over that square so they're not affected by the flak, and then they can attack them after they leave the flak zone, which might be interesting. So that's what we're going to do. I am going to have the G50s tally the Blenheim T Squadron that are now in their square, which they can't fail. So they're going to put their tally on here. Then, when the movement happens, the Blenheim S will move out of the flak zone. The Blenheim T will move into the flak zone and drop its bombs. And the G50s, who are now not circling anymore, will go above that square so they're not hit by the direct fire, and then they're going to attack the Blenheim T Squadron as they leave the flak zone on the other side, which will probably end up breaking the G50s, but at least they can try and get a couple more losses on the bombers there to get some more victory points. So I think that's going to be the best tactic here. Also, I've checked on the flak rules and clarified a few things. Barrage will affect any squadron that enters a barrage hex or circles in a barrage hex. But flak, you have to target it at that specific location of the plane. When the planes are flying through the flak zone, they're only going to get attacked when they stop their movement in the flak zone. If they're on the way in, they're not getting attacked. On the way out, they're not getting attacked. It's only if they stop their movement in the flak zone that they can get attacked by it. So in this case, the Blenheims only spend 1 turn in the flak zone, because this, remember, is the flak zone here, up to altitude 4. S gets attacked once and then leaves, and that's it. And then T will get attacked once and then leaves. If T had come in such that it stopped its movement here, it could get attacked, and then it would drop its bombs mid-movement as it's flying over, and when it gets to this square, it could get attacked by the flak directly again, and then it would leave. That's how that works for the flak. So that's what we're going to do here. So in turn 8, the tallying is done. The movement now is that the S squadron moves away, having dropped its bombs. The T squadron will move in to the flak zone and drop its bombs. And the A squadron is going to climb up to here. So it's going to do a up one, over, and it could in fact keep going so that it can catch the Blenheims on the other side. They will need a climb marker for that, and their climb at this altitude is still 1, so that's fine. It still costs 1 movement to do. So they're keeping an eye on them basically as they're flying over and seeing what happens when the flak attacks them. Now we have the direct fire flak, which I'll put up in the top right corner again. We have a flak strength of 0, no supporting fire, no other modifiers for speed or slow marker. The altitude is 6 or less. The target did perform bomb aiming this turn. Technically, again, we should have done this, but at the start of the movement, they did declare that their target was the supply, and they're going to move 2 squares in a straight line over it, so they are aiming. It's a +2, and that's it. So let's see if this direct fire does anything. Oh, it does something! Wow! And how? It's a 12. Which ordinarily would be 2 hits, but on a 14 or more, it says die. And if you recall, that does not mean that the bombers all die. It means you roll a die to see how many hits you inflicted. So that's pretty awesome there. So this is going to screw the bombing up as well. And we roll a cohesion check. So yeah, we roll 1 die, and that's the number of hits. 4. Yikes. Okay. They got really hammered there. And because it's direct fire, the firepower value is +1. So they're going to get a +1 on their roll, and that's it. So T is going to get hammered here maybe. Let's see how much damage we do. First roll is a 6, that's a loss. Another 6, another loss. A 4, that is a loss because it's +1. And another loss. Wow, 4 losses. Yikes. The flak team on the ground really woke up then after the first one went over. Holy cow. Okay, these bombers are not having a good day. And they make a cohesion roll. So now they have taken a total of 5 losses. They are not veterans or anything. So it's just a -5 on the roll. So at the very least, they'll be lucky to not get disrupted here. 7 -5, that's 3 or less. They are disrupted, so that's going to affect their bombing. So we have to disrupt them. Wow, that was amazing. So these G50s might actually have a chance here. It's a bit fuzzy here, but technically the bombs dropped immediately as soon as they entered that square, but they are affected by what happens in the flak roll. So they're kind of dropping during or just after the flak hit. So the bombs land on the supply. So now we get to see what the modifiers are. And it's relatively simple really, because again, despite this huge table of modifiers, there's only a couple that actually apply. So we don't have any altitude modifiers because we're at altitude 2 and the V bomb site means that we have a 0 modifier there. Nothing else applies until we get to the bombing modifier inflicted by the flak attack. So we got a 14 on the roll. The bombing modifier in the top left there is -2. So that means they've taken so much flak here that it screwed up their aiming and so on. There's a -2 on the roll already, and there's another -2 because they are now disrupted. So that's a -4. You'll note as well that the bomber can still drop their bombs even if they're broken, but they get a -4 just for that. So that's it. They did aim, but they've got a -4 on their roll, which is instantly terrible. So a -4, unless they roll another 12, yeah, no, they're done there. So their bombs did no damage. that is it. The bombing run has done minimal damage on the supply. They get a whopping 1 victory point for dropping their bombs on the supply. And the Italians are getting a lot of victory points for shooting down a lot of bombers. So there's no air combat. That's it. We move on to the next turn. And now, no more tallying. The bombers move. Blenheim S squadron moves 2 forward, making a break for it. T moves 2 forward as well. Now it's out of the flak zone. It doesn't get attacked by the flak anymore. But now the G50s can pounce on the now weakened bomber squadron here. And now they're diving as well, so that's going to help. One or both of these could get broken here. So the attacker is going to be the Italians, because the bombers are the defenders here. And they are going to go for a speed attack. So that is a 4. It is modified by +1 because they're diving. They are a squadron. They are not veteran or green. There's no other squadrons in the fight. They are disrupted, so that's a -1. And they're not defending using rigid doctrine. And they're not single aircraft units. So they've got a speed rating of 4. The bombers, on the other hand, have a speed of 3 at this altitude. And they still have a speed of 3 because they're no longer carrying the bomb load. So that doesn't reduce their speed by 1 anymore. And they are disrupted, and that's it. So they get a -1 for being disrupted. So it's a combat differential of 2. The G50s will roll on the +2 column, and the Blenheims will roll on the -2 column. The defenders are not evading. It's not a bounce. Nobody has an expert. It's not head-on combat, obviously. So it's all just a straight roll for both of them. So on the +2 column, the G50s roll. Oh my god, they got another 12. Oh, wow. Fortune is favouring the Italians, certainly. That's 4 more hits, potentially. Yikes. And the hapless bombers here get a 7 on the -2 column, which is not enough to get a hit. So 4 more hits, potentially. Now, I guess the good thing here is that the G50s do not have any firepower. There's no other modifiers on the losses roll, so it's just straight D6 rolls. Remember, the Blenheims have got protection 3 to 4. So higher rolls is better for the Italians again. 4 hits. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we've got a definite loss, a miss, and a straggler. There we go. So they have taken a pounding here. Now comes the cohesion roll, where I'm assuming this is all going to come to an end now. And we have, for the attackers, they have no losses. They're not veteran or green. They are the attackers, so that's a +1. But they have a -2 on their roll because they have depleted ammo. So it's a net of -1. Let's see what happens. That's a 7. They have a -1. That brings them down to a 6. So A is now broken. They are done. That's it for the Italians, but I think they can go home knowing that they've definitely made a difference there. So the bombers, with a whopping 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 losses. So it's a -6 on their roll, and that's it. So unless they roll 11 or 12, basically, they're going to break. Oh, no, they do not. They roll the 2. Well, that's a broken bomber squadron then. They are done. And that is essentially it, because what happens next is that in the next turn the bombers will move off. They are returning to base. It doesn't really matter whether they return to base this way or if they fly around the flak here, because they're not going to be in the combat anymore. And so are the G50s, and then the next turn they escape, and that's it. So that's the end of the scenario, which was complete carnage. I'm pretty sure that the Italians won this one quite handily. The British player gets 1 extra VP for each undisrupted Blenheim squadron that makes a bombing attack regardless of results. At the time, S was undisrupted and T was disrupted, so they get 1 victory point for that at least. At the end of that, everything is 1 victory point except for the Blenheims here, which are 2. The Italians inflicted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 losses on the bombers. So that's 16 points right there. And 1 loss on the fighters, so that's another 1, that's 17 points for them. The British inflicted 1 loss, so that's 1 point to them. And for bombing, they only did 1 hit on the supply with the first squadron. Hits greater than 0, but not equal to exceeding half the damage value of the supply. Half the value would be 2, so they've got less than half but more than 0, and that means they get 1 victory point. So that is 1 VP, and that's it. And the Brits also do not get any victory points for bombers that have left the map without a bomb load, because they're going to get their victory points from their bombing then. So they don't get that 6 VP that we had before in the birthday present scenario. So that means that the Brits have 2 victory points and the Italians have 17. Subtract the Italian VPs from the British VPs to see who wins. Well, 2 minus 17 is minus 15. Plus 4 or less is an Italian victory. So the Italians absolutely trounced the Brits on that one. So that's that. That's a little demonstration of flak and bombing. There is more to it. Like I said, there is barrage as well that I haven't shown yet. There are heavy flak, there's different flak channels, there's a lot of different types of bombing. As you can see on the bombing table, there is level bombing, which is what we're doing here. There's kamikaze attacks, the plane is literally the bomb. There's dive bombing, there's rockets, there's strafing, there's steep angle bombing, there's glide bombing, there's parafrag, there's skip bombing, there's torpedo attacks, there's anvil attacks. And frankly, I haven't even found the scenarios that have those in them yet. So I may get to those at a later point. There's naval targets as well, so we'll have ships out here, and the ground is actually the sea. And ships can have built-in flak, and they can have their own special rules for things as well, by being armoured, being vulnerable to torpedoes, having low-angle naval guns. So there's a lot to cover. I may do some videos on that later on. That would be more like a more detailed scenario. This is one of the simplest bombing scenarios that is in the game. So it wouldn't be as quick to get through because there'll be multiple targets on the ground or the sea. Lots of flak flying around. It would take a lot longer. And that's probably why some of the scenarios that I've live streamed, that I've got the videos on in a separate playlist, took so long. Because there was a lot of squadrons, there's a lot of flak and targets on the ground. It takes a long time to actually go through it all. But for now, that's it for the flak and bombing. So hopefully that helped, and it's not quite as intimidating as it looks, but it does add a bit of complexity to the game. But it's quite interesting. The bombing does seem to be really hard to get decent results. On the level bombing run, you're essentially only able to get a maximum modifier of +2. And that is if the bomber is not attacked by flak this game turn, they get a +1. And if the bomber squadron is veteran, it becomes now worth putting veteran markers on bomber squadron as well. But even then, a +2, and to actually do decent amounts of damage, like at least 50% or more, that's 10 or more. So you need to roll an 8 or more on a 2d6, and then you can get vaguely decent results. But at this point, if the second Blenheim had got 8 or 9, they would have got 25% damage. 25% of their 9 bomb value would be 2. The extra 2 hits would have meant that we got 3 hits on the supply. And if we get equal to the damage rating, which is a 3, then they would have got the full victory points for that, which is 10. But even if they had got that, they would have got a total of 11 victory points, and the Italians have just slaughtered the bombers here. So they still would have lost, even if they'd done 3 points of damage on the supply. The only way they could have won, I think, is if the bombers were super effective against the supply and they rolled full damage, 100% damage on both runs. If you do at least triple the damage of the damage rating of the target, which is 3 here, if they did 9 damage, i.e. their entire bomb value, then they would have got triple the victory points. So they would have got 30 victory points. That would have meant that they win the scenario. So they had to do really well on the bombing run, and they didn't. And the first one didn't do very well just by bad luck. And the second squadron didn't do very well because it was getting blown to smithereens by the flak. So that's unfortunate, but that's it. That's it for the scenario. So I'll see what else I can figure out, but for now that covers flak and bombing. So as usual, if you've got any questions or comments, do leave them in the comment below. If you like what you see here, do please give the video a like and subscribe to my channel to get notifications on when new videos are up. And with that, thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. Ta-ta!